looks like I am live. Well, yesterday we did the essentially tightened up the pencil test on this animation of Salud, and did not do the lip sync, so maybe that's something we should look at. Officially, the stream doesn't start for 10 minutes, but my basic attitude is in terms of adhering to best practices, I don't care. But on the other hand, for the sake of you guys, I will try to avoid getting too deep until the official time. So what that means in practice is probably what I should do is use the introductory segment here to review what we did yesterday. Fair enough? Okay. Yesterday, I should turn this all off. Okay, and what I'm going to think about here as I relate it is going to be essentially what are the things that are worth mentioning that maybe you'll learn from that'll turn out to be useful in some way. Okay, so Salud, I think this is about where we ended up yesterday, is this, you know, just completing the pencil test. And clearly there's no lip sync. Did we actually do? Yeah, I think we did. We did the animation with the plastic tool as well. So if you recall, what I did was I added this flatting layer specifically so that when we add the plastic tool would create a mesh around the character. If you didn't do the flatting, it would still work for animation purposes in terms of the rough animation, meaning that you see the movements in his body. These movements are the result of the plastic tool. Well, and for those who don't know what that means, let's grab this layer, and you can see that these are what Tahoma 2D or OpenTunes call bones. Okay. So anyway, by the way, it looks like we've got a couple concurrent viewers. That's cool. Thanks for showing up. Whoever you are, why don't you put something in the comment, tell me who's here. Anyway, so I think yesterday we went ahead and added the bones, I think. And then I animated just some simple secondary, what I call secondary animation, to kind of show his attitude as he's talking, because he has a voice sort of like this. And he definitely has a little bit of a tood. Okay, so, hey Darren. Okay, so there's that. So then, what you didn't witness, because we didn't get to it yesterday, was what I did was, first of all, I turned the flatting layer off, because once the plastic tool has created the mesh to determine what parts of the picture it's going to deform, it is no longer necessary to have the color, if you will, on the screen that caused that mesh to be created. Once the mesh is created, it's going to influence everything within the range of the mesh, so you can turn this back off and not have it distracting you. Good morning, Tom. Okay, so then what I did, if I recall, after I signed off and then sort of hung out with Valerie for a little while, is I turned the opacity of this down and I did do the ink. So I did the ink job, which I don't think there's much to say here. Maybe the one thing I would note for those who are interested is that for the ink, I am using a My Paint brush that I created a long time ago. And the key thing about it is, what is the, I'm looking at what the essentially smoothing, what they call it, slow position tracking. Slow position tracking is what My Paint calls smoothing. And so actually, now that I think about it, because I've coded a smoothing operation in JavaScript, I would guess that the reason this value is 10 is that is probably the number of dabs that's being smoothed. In other words, it's taking your mouse moves, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 messages that the system gets as the mouse moves. Okay, so now if on a continual basis, the system is taking the last 10 dabs and then averaging them, that would be your smoothing operation. So, and you guys both program actually, so you guys would know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so that's the key thing. It's a My Paint brush that has very little anti-aliasing baked into the brush, because I figure at actual speed, number one, at actual speed, if there was no anti-aliasing in the ink lines at all, you still wouldn't see it most of the time, because on a 2-pixel brush, you just don't see it, And plus, actually, if the truth be known, I'm getting off the beaten path here, but truth be known, if I'm creating animation at 1280 by 720, but I'm delivering it in HD, it gets up-res, that alone would cause a smoothing operation on these stair-steppy edges that would probably be sufficient. However, if you're a little worried about that, why would you have stair-stepped ink lines is one question you might ask. And the reason is because it makes fill operations a lot more reliable. Okay. But the other thing you can do is go to your level settings, and you can turn on anti-aliasing, which I always set it to 100. And what that means is when it renders, let me turn this pencil test layer off. When it renders, you can see there's a smoothing that takes place. I accomplish the same thing in Krita all the time with a 1-pixel blur, just a regular 1-pixel blur. See some unfilled pixels at the zoom level. Do you have a strategy you use to fill them? Yeah, there's 2 strategies. Number one, and Tom, you'll appreciate the pragmatist in me that says this. Number one, ignore them. Why? Well, because this is literally 1 pixel. And guess what? It's going to turn out that when you turn on your background, when you put the background in the picture, it turns out that in this case, the random blue is sufficiently dark enough that, especially if the character's in motion, you're never going to see that empty pixel. And if you did, you wouldn't care. And in reality, you can test this by just watching some anime and look for flaws. And what you'll start to find is they're all over the place. It's just not that big of a deal. So if you want to be anal about it, to answer your question, what would be the proper way to fix it? It would be this. You would, in OpenTunes or Tahoma, you would grab the appropriate color, this, and probably what you would do is you would hit the fill tool and you would put it in, you want freehand mode. In freehand mode, you can do the lasso thing. Okay, and it's quite convenient because you can lasso an entire area like this, and it would, I can show you that it would, so I don't know, maybe you didn't know that, Tom, but the lasso tool is pretty tight in OpenTunes and Tahoma. So, like, here's a couple more examples of what Tom's talking about. Let me see something here. Okay, yeah, that's the right color. I'm going to do the fill tool. And just doing that cleans it up. So, again, strategy number one is don't worry about it. And that works pretty well till you get into, you get downstream and you find out that that pixel you ignored actually matters. And so at that point, yes, turn up the fill depth. Actually, for a while there, and I guess this might be helpful for people who don't use OpenTunes, who, especially if they follow me, and they're mainly kind of dancing around in Krita. For a while there, it was in fact my habit to do fill operations hitting down the shift key. Okay, so for those who might watch this later, what Darren's talking about is that when you go to do a fill operation in Tahoma 2D or in OpenTunes, you've got this fill depth factor here from a minimum to a maximum. And if you hit shift, it will apply the maximum fill depth. And if you don't hit shift, it'll apply, I assume, the minimum. So having a fill depth, the truth is for most people, probably having your fill depth set something like this is probably the best choice. We can find out, we can test that by just doing a fill operation in normal mode right now and see if that pixel comes up empty again. Okay, and it did, but mainly because it's within the mustache. So, you know, what do you expect, right? Anyway, there's a new feature in OpenTunes that I hope will come to Tahoma soon that works like the freehand, but you don't need to change colors. It picks the first color that you start freehanding on. That's interesting. Let me think about that. Have you used that a lot and found it to be super useful? The reason I'm asking is, you know, sometimes features are introduced into the software that kind of just adds a slightly streamlined workflow to capability that was pretty much there all the time, and or isn't necessarily a massive win. Like, for example, the feature you're just talking about is, what does that save you? It saves you the basically half a second it takes you to select the right color that you want to fill with. So that could be pretty useful, but I'm trying to think about what's going to go wrong, where you're going to be working fast and you're going, yeah, it's just going to pick my color for me, and then something about that is going to be a little winky, but we'll see. Okay, so now, by the way, as long as we're doing cleanup here, I'm hitting the G key. I think the default hotkeys are different than mine. I changed them literally years ago. Okay, sorry about the webcam. But what I'm coming around to here is that for me, I hit the G key to sample colors. So you can see that when I sample, it's jumping around in the palette. So for me, the R key samples the color and the G key samples the palette entry. So when I use the G key and click somewhere, it's not sampling the color, it's saying, oh, you clicked on this palette entry, etc. Okay, so I'm doing the same thing here. I'm grabbing this, and then vis-a-vis the discussion about fill operations, if I hit the F key and hit shift, the fill depth will now be 10. Okay, and as you can see, it still wasn't perfect. So one might ask, how high can we go and see what happens? Okay, so honestly, putting it at 15 didn't make any difference. I hit shift and it still didn't fill these two. So in other words, it's just not perfect, and that's okay. That's what the lasso tool is for, or not the lasso tool, but I should say the freehand mode of doing fill operations, which amounts to doing something like this. Icky dokie. And here we go. And by the way, you can do this with a frame range too. So if I wanted to, I could come up here, lasso the belt, come down to the last frame, lasso the belt again, and everything in between those two frames, everything gets filled. So it's pretty easy to do the fixes too. Okay, so somebody, Nolaval. Hey, Nolaval. I don't think I've seen you here before, so welcome. Okay. So now we need to take a deep breath. We've been live streaming for 15 minutes. And let's start moving on to new material. The next thing I did was put in the mouth shapes. So you'll notice that here the mouth disappears. And the reason for that is I knew that I was going to be putting it in on another layer. Okay, I put in the mouth shapes. And just for the record, for those who care, when I drew the mouth shapes, let me hit the tilde key. When I drew the mouth shapes, what I actually did was I grabbed this ink right here. I'm sorry, that was wrong. Okay, I meant to hit the B key. Okay, when I drew these mouth shapes, I went like this. okay, around the lines to connect them, actually all the way up like that. So for those who don't know, the reason you might want to do that is the settings on this color, and I think it might be here, auto paint for lines. It's a strange name for it, but what it means is when you do the fill operation to fill this brown color in, the blue line will disappear. So it's basically just a guide thing. Well, good to have you back, Nullival. Hope I'm saying that right. Okay, so that's what auto paint for lines is. You have a palette entry that you use for just a lot. What a lot of people do is they use it for shadows, but I'm going to add shadows here in a minute, and I don't do it that way. So in other words, in the perfect, let me see if this is, control. I have to hit control tilde, and which in terms of soloing layers doesn't exactly work because it turns everything back on, which isn't actually what I intended. So anyway, there's, by the way, another stray pixel. Let's go to Salud, and let's do a fill operation. And by the way, I should mention too, a lot of times when I'm touching up things like this, like here's your fix. Okay, let's turn off frame range. Okay, that's the wrong color. G to sample the color, F to lasso. A lot of times when I do those touch-ups, I just hit the V key and paint. I have the Smart Raster paintbrush tool set, as you can see, from a minimum of 1 to a maximum of 20 with pressure, which basically at any point in time for any color gives me this. Pretty good control. Obviously, it's not anti-aliased, but for quick and dirty fill touch-ups and stuff, it's quite useful. Super useful, actually. So, where were we before I so rudely interrupted myself? Okay, so he says somebody's tights are in a tizzy. All right, so let's go up out of the sub scene or sub X sheet, depending on your terminology. And this is what we have. So we have this sub scene. Oh boy, for exhaustive teaching purposes here in Tahoma 2D/OpenTunes, I would say be aware of this one. When I initially created this sub scene, it only went down to frame, I think, 15, and then I added the lip sync here. Okay, well that changed the length of the sub scene. Up here, within the main scene that the sub scene is contained inside of, this sub scene sequence only went to 15, and then all these other numbered frames were not there. Well, okay, so just be aware what you do is when you change something in the sub scene, you right mouse click on the, I think it needs to be the header as opposed to one of the frames. Yes. Okay, so when I click on one of these frames, and this is a nuance that if you didn't remember it, it would frustrate the hell out of you, because it's in the menu. If you click here, and what we're looking for is resequence. Resequence is the terminology for saying go into the subscene and recalculate how many frames there are and then have those appear in the main scene. So yeah, it's a little maddening because if you click on the header, you get resequence, but if you were to click here, you don't. Okay, and frankly, yesterday I had to, yesterday was kind of about remembering how to do things in Tahoma, just because I haven't been there in a long time. At least not much, anyway. Okay, so notably, once you got the plastic tool rocking, there's no need for you to necessarily see the cage that's doing the deformation. So, just turn the layer off, or the level. Wouldn't it be helpful to have mouse over tooltips on things like that? Well, I don't know, Tom. That's almost asking, that's almost opening a worse can of worms. So, because what are you going to do? You know, I mouse over this. I assume you're referring to the fact that there's this little bit of nuance between the menus here. It's significant partly because I'll bet you there's a lot of duplication too. So here we see open subscene, collapse, blah, blah, blah. What if I mouse here? I don't know, the two menus are pretty different. So when you right mouse click, the menu pops up. So I don't know what you'd put in a tooltip that would say, hey, by the way, if the reason you're here is to resequence, make sure you're mousing over the header of the column instead of one of the cells in the column. Yeah, I tell you, there's a audio workstation software called Traction, which is a commercial product. I think it's like $100 these days. I used to use back when I started making films. I switched to Reaper like, gosh, probably 2010. But before that, I was using Traction. And Traction had something like that was actually quite cool. It had verbose mouse over help, so that when you open the program, anything your mouse went over, a fairly, as I say, verbose explanation of what was available there would pop up. And then at any time, you could just turn off the verbose help. So something like that would not be the worst idea ever. It would be good to have resequence on the subscene frames themselves. Actually, I disagree with all of the above. I disagree with everything that's been said about that so far, about tooltips and all the rest. Here's why. There shouldn't be any menu option at all. There should not be any click anything to resequence. The whole idea that that's there is actually pretty stupid. Under what circumstances would you want to extend the length of a subscene, which naturally happens because it's really common to have some stuff and then you add more stuff or you change the timing, okay? So the very idea that we have to do anything to tell the program to do the resequencing is really beyond daft. Like, that's like, okay, how stupid do we want to be? Why? Well, because you say, well, wait a minute, what about the one person that happens probably in the entire country once every, 10 years, where somebody changes a subscene but doesn't want it to resequence? Well, look, there, problem solved. You just edit the subscene. So that's my take on it. The whole idea of resequencing is dumber than a box of rocks. It should be taken out of the program and it should just happen automatically, without exception, because mitigating its effects is very intuitive. It's intuitive because you're able to treat a sub-scene exactly the same way you treat any other level. So as long as it's consistent in terms of how you interact with it, that's all you need. So I can be sure that if I stretch this out, that particular frame will extend. Okay, because of the plastic tool, obviously that created some artifacts, but you get my point. So anyway. Well, okay. Darren says, I don't always want the subscene frames shown on the main timeline. And that's, I have to respect that. If you don't, you don't. That's just my opinion. My opinion today, and I would say probably not going to change the opinion, is there should not be any step required. Honestly, I mean, if you want to think about it philosophically from a programming standpoint, the basic idea should be this. That which is not intuitive or fairly obvious should probably be automatic, okay, with a way to stop it. What we have in OpenTunes is the opposite. That which is not intuitive, the need to resequence, requires me to gain knowledge and then take a step that I otherwise find a little baffling. And by the way, this is true in, say, Vegas. When you use a nested scene in Vegas, if you update the nested scene, it just propagates into the main timeline in Vegas. So it's exactly the same type of functionality. The difference is, in the main scene, the the sequence length doesn't change. So to Darren's point, that's where I kind of half agree with you. Why? Well, because the in fact, I'm going to ask you a question here in half a second, Darren, that I hope you can answer. You answered it a long time ago, and I just don't remember the answer. Okay, so the middle ground would be that the resequencing does happen automatically, but the cells don't appear. So then what would be required would be to just extend this down, and what would happen is that the live frames would just appear. So from an editorial standpoint, you get the benefit that Darren is citing, but from an internal under the hood workflow standpoint, you get the benefit that I'm citing. The resequence happens, but the exposure of it is what doesn't happen. In OpenTunes and Tahoma, it's a little wrong-headed because it doesn't happen at all unless you tell it to. So to me, that's a little silly, but anyway, I mean, the best option would be some kind of checkbox where you can turn auto resequencing on and off. Absolutely. That's actually exactly. Yeah. And for me, that would be my preference. Okay, so let's keep rocking. We got to do shadows. So what is this? Okay, by the way, yes. If you're going to use Tahoma 2D or OpenTunes, get familiar with F3. I can't emphasize enough. Learn what the schematic is for and what it does, because it's really, really, really powerful for both the structure of your scene and also for special effects, blurs, filters, color correction, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so I'm just noting that this level was added to the scene strictly to operate as a dummy level so that I could scale Salud. Okay, so if I disconnect these, if you look closely, you see how Salud just changed size down here? Okay, I didn't like the framing. I wanted to put in more on the rule of thirds a little bit. I just wanted better framing. So I created a dummy layer. You can do that with pegs. You can do it a lot of ways. The point for people that are thinking about workflow would be that if you resized Salud's layer directly, then it would no longer fit the mesh that's generated by the plastic tool. This mesh would no longer fit around Salud. Now, of course, yes, you could regenerate the mesh. You know, the problem that introduces is you may have to sort of reconfigure your bone configuration, blah, blah, blah. So the simplest solution would have been to resize the plastic tool layer. However, I didn't want to do that because I already had these keyframes for the bone movement. And the problem with doing normal animate tool transforms, like scaling and moving and rotating your layers, is that the keyframe would show up here in the column with no distinction between or access to the individual keyframes to translate the whole, the whole shot of the character versus the individual bone movements. So it winds up being a situation where you have to go into the function editor in order to fix things. It's a pain in the ass. Okay, so and the reason it's a pain is because these dots just tell you that something is animated on this frame. That's it. That's all this is telling you. And if you're dealing with a fairly simple scene, then it's pretty easy to change and edit it because you know what you're dealing with here. Once you start intermixing bone animation keyframes with regular transforms, in other words, animation from some other tool, you lose the ability to distinguish what's what. Therefore, simplest solution is just add a stupid dummy frame, connect the plastic tool frame to it, and then just resize this instead. And that means also that at any time I can just turn it off if I want to compare before and after, blah, blah, blah. So I'm big on using dummy frames. Theoretically, probably, I don't know, but probably this should be ordered more like this. Okay, so agree 100%. Different comment. Yeah, thank you, Darren. I can see many occasions where you do want the frames mapped to one, so auto resequencing is a useful thing. Well, the other thing is I could totally see a situation where, I'll put it this way, I think that the elegant mapping of a standard frame or a column that is a sequence of images behaving exactly the same as a sequence of cells that are not images, they're actually subsheet cells. To me, having those behave as much exactly the same way as possible that's what you want. That is pretty much how nested scenes work in Vegas, but it's not a perfect world. If you nest more than 2 or 3 layers deep in Vegas, of course, just like dealing with functions in programming that redirect too many times, it starts to become too much to keep in your head. But also it becomes buggy and Vegas crashes, so there's that to consider. Pegs will make their way to the sheet. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it would be good if pegs appeared on the X sheet, definitely. Because what Darren's referring to, a peg, is effectively the same as using a dummy column. Now, having said that, let's face it. I don't even remember what the hotkey is here to minimize this. Like, there's a way to minimize this column so that it's just a thin sliver. So if you're using it as a dummy, to me, the way I think of it is, if it's a dummy frame and you minimize it to a sliver, functionally it's exactly the same as a peg layer. And I'm not sure about any benefits you get with pegs that you don't get with dummy columns. Do you know? A fold column, is that what it is? Okay, yeah, so fold. There you go. So there my dummy column is reduced to nothing. It's not taking up space or anything, and there it is. Now what Darren's referring to is here on the in the schematic, you can actually add a peg layer, and the peg layer effectively does the same damn thing that a dummy drawing layer does. So there it is, friends. Okay, so now what we're going to do is deal with shadows. There's basically 2 ways to deal with shadows. There's a sloppy way that's a little quick, and it won't work in this case, which is, in some cases where I've got really crisp ink and paint, and I am using the plastic tool, it turns out, by a remarkable coincidence of fate, that the border of the plastic tool mesh is effectively a mask, which means that if you were to create the mesh around this, then you could add another layer that goes outside of this, like a shadow layer where it's bleeding outside the edges, and you would only see up to the edge. In this case, because when I generated the plastic tool mesh, I was actually using the pencil test in the flattening layer, it's messy, so that won't work. So we're going to have to do it in the schematic. So here's what we're going to do. Watch closely, friends. This is the way I do shadows, and I think it's like the best way, okay? So what I'm going to do is add a vector layer. The reason I like vector layers for shadows is because the normal paint tools in Tahoma 2D do not include a freehand path tool like Krita has, where you can just draw a shape and it's automatically filled. Now you certainly can do this. You can go B key, draw a shape, hit the F key, and fill it immediately. Of course, I'm in freehand mode still. Okay, so it is not that onerous to go like that. It's 2 steps instead of 1. Okay. Whereas the vector tool has the ability to auto-close a shape that you draw and auto-fill it. You should play with this if you're into, honestly, for painting backgrounds, it's actually quite useful, because you can wind up drawing shapes, and then you might have a highlight or shadow color that's very subtle that you can build up layers of it, and you wind up with like a 4 to 12 value painting that for cartoons looks really good, you know. So if you're going, what the hell are you even talking about? Let me show you. So boom, I just draw this shape And there it is. Now, for purposes of illustrating what I just said, this is what I'm talking about. Take this color, but let's turn the alpha down to some really low level. Okay, so now I can go like this, and I can build this up. That's all I'm talking about. All right. Interesting. Selection tool. Gosh. Okay, I hit the S key and it turns into the fill tool. That's a little weird. Okay, anyway, here's how I use the vector tool for shadows. So I'm going to hit the B key, and all I'm going to do is just draw a shape. Okay, so I'm going to be fairly sloppy about it. And I don't want to like really kill myself doing tons and tons of shadows. It's just creating a bunch of work for me. So I want to be somewhat judicious. But in practice, it usually turns out to be something like this. And probably over here. Okay, if I go outside the lines, it doesn't matter. All right, so now there's a few ways that we can deal with the opacity. If we deal with the opacity at the color level, we do see these outlines slightly darker. Does it render that way? It does. So, and I haven't done this in a while, so I have to remember, but I think what I recall is that the best I like Novel's comment. That's good. That's right. Okay, when you turn down the column opacity, I believe okay, now it oh wait. Let's go to the level settings. We got to slow down here a little bit. Level settings, and we want to I guess it's scene settings. Is it scene setting? Enable column color filter and transparency for rendering. That's what we want. Again, Tahoma and OpenTunes do put things in strange places and label them strangely. But now you can see that by enabling the transparency of the column to render that way, oops, that I did not mean to do. Okay. When you actually render it, as you can see, those bizarre, slightly too dark edges no longer appear. So that's good news. All right. So now, I think the wise course of action is going to be to hit the D key, because the only, actually, stop. We don't need to even add a keyframe here. So the only thing that's changed is the winking thing on his eye. And fortunately, we're not gonna have too many of these to do, because there's a lot that repeats from frame to frame. So I'm going to hit the selection tool to grab these guys. And, you know, obviously, if you wanted to sort of, I'm gonna extend this up to here. Come on. Okay. Interesting. No onion skins. Wonder why. No onion skins on a vector layer? Is that what's going on here? Oh, it might be because I'm in rendered mode. Let me see. Yep, there's the issue. Okay. Darren's probably screaming at his screen. Well, actually, Darren, I tell you what, dude, I actually have autosave on. So it's saving every about 5 minutes. I've learned my lesson too freaking many times. So yeah, onion skins, a bit helpful at times. Honestly, I'm unusual probably in that onion skins are something I pretty much use whenever I'm doing shadows like I'm doing now, but not a lot of the rest of the time. Okay, so I'm going to just keep this loosey-goosey, baby. Sloppy as can be, and then we'll see shortly how we will make these shadows actually look correct. By the way, interesting thing to note here, I guess, is that the transparency doesn't seem to show up until you render. So I'm curious, can we compensate for that this way by turning this down just for visuals, but then see what happens when we render? Nah, it's still lighter. Okay, so that doesn't really, I mean, of course you could turn it down if it's like distracting you, but we're learning as we go, friends. We're learning as we go. That's what we're doing. Okay, now, yeah, let's just draw a new, and by the way, for those of you that are going to experiment with the vector tools using autofill like I'm doing right now, do not ever, when you're doing this, when you're using the vector tool, or you're using the brush on a vector level in autofill mode, never take your stylus and touch the screen like as if you were to make a dot. Last time I checked, and this was true for at least a year, that blows up Tahoma 2D, causes a crash. Now the reason it happens is actually kind of logical, which is that Tahoma is looking for you to draw a shape of some kind, which it can then fill. If you draw a dot, there's nothing to fill, right? And it gets a little confused by that, to use Salud's voice. Okay, so now the question becomes, how are we going to deal with these shadows? Let's turn the onion skins off. Isn't this fun, guys? Aren't we having fun today? I think we're having fun. Okay, I am going to say this is actually a little hot. It seems to me, yes, shadows used to be. Did you open a defect? Did you open a defect on that, Dave? Tom, I'm sorry. I guess I'm dense, but I have no idea. Oh, on the bug? Oh my god, dude, it's been that bug appeared. That bug has been present from the time that autofill was available. And I'm not going to click my screen to find out if it's still there. I have no idea. I've almost never opened up issues on GitHub or whatever. You know, on the Krita side of things, I'm kind of friends with Hala, who is the main developer of Krita. So if there was something that was really a nook in my craw that I wanted to have addressed in Krita, I suspect Hala would listen to me. But I don't, going through the whole GitHub process, reporting bugs, blah, blah, blah. Call me an unparticipatory bastard, but the fact is I don't do that stuff. That bug is a feature now. Yeah, right, exactly. Crazy how they morph. Okay, so what are we going to do about the shadow bleed? This is what I'm talking about. This is shadow bleed. Notably, what I could have done is just draw the shapes more carefully. But what we're going to do is very simple. Okay? Very, very simple. This is, by the way, also where we realize it would be smart to name our columns. So this is going to be SHD for shadow. This is going to be, let's just call this Vox, VOX for Vox, which for me means mouth shapes. And then this is CHAR for character. I tend to like to label things by what they are, not who they are. So I typically would not call this like Salud, you know, his name. It's a character layer. Okay, so what are we doing? What we're going to do is we're just going to mask it this way. So here's the character, and here's the shadow. So what we're going to do is we are going to do a layer blending INO of multiply. So the character is the background and the shadow is the foreground. That means the shadow's on top. And then in the multiply settings, clipping mask by default is turned on. Now, the opacity of the shadows. Obviously, what we could have done here is we could have made this fully opaque. and then take this and make it 0.13. And when we render, so you could do it that way, or you could do it this way. Take a pick. Like most things in OpenTunes, there's umpteen ways to do stuff. Okay, now this is interesting. It's one of those things you don't really think about until you have to think about it. The ordering of the frames has now been corrupted by this operation. Okay? In other words, because the mouth column is to the right, it's on top of the character column. But the shadow is over everything. But what we did in the schematic is we sort of inexorably tied these two frames or columns together. Well, under the hood, these two are tied together, but there's still this one in between them. And Tahoma says, I don't know what to do with that. Now, it could be, it's literally possible if we go up into the sub-X sheet that the problem will disappear. I have no idea. It doesn't look like it. But maybe. Yeah, so we'll discover all kinds of wacky artifacts that are happening, right? Okay, so you can see there's all kinds of garbage going on. We don't want to get too fussy about it yet, okay? Because we did introduce this problem. Another thing that's interesting here is that we have implicit hold. This is another one of those terms that is not intuitive, okay? Probably. Implicit hold means that if I have a drawing on this cell, then subsequent cells will continue to show that same drawing, which they do except when we render in this case, as you can see. Okay, in the normal case, if implicit hold was turned off, then this would not happen. Early versions of OpenTunes and Tahoma worked this way. So in those cases, you would have to explicitly extend the column thusly. Okay? No big deal. Basically, it works. Everything's cool. But in this case, because of what we did in the schematic, we've introduced some problems. So there's probably multiple ways to solve this. My thinking is that the smartest path forward is just to do a simple alpha over. And truth is, what really should happen is the mouth should be alpha over the character. So these two are tied together, and then the shadow multiplied over top of that. So the way that would look, just if you want to think through the logic here, you say, okay, I've got my character, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do layer blending. That's going to be actually over. We just want over INO. The foreground would actually be the mouth, and the background would be the head. So we'll get rid of that line. And I think that should do the trick. Now, it could be that our render buffers are, I wonder, let me check something here. It could be that I've uncovered a bug in implicit hold, and the only thing that's actually going wrong here is that implicit hold has stopped working. And it looks like that is the case. So why using this schematic would cause implicit hold to break, I'm not sure, but no big deal, friends. But I don't know. It's still not showing up. Okay, so I am going to INO are the initials of the developer. Yeah, I didn't know that. Thanks for that one, Darren. Okay, I'm going to turn that. I'm going to stop that because, you know, we bumped into a problem that, you know, I didn't see coming today. So this is a bit strange. If the mouth is over the character and the shadow is over the mouth, now we can test what the heck's going on real quick by going ahead and connecting up this directly. Okay, and we see that this is still broken. So now I'm going to kill this connection entirely. And let's double check a couple things here structurally. It's very interesting. Again, never bumped into this before. It's a little difficult showing you guys what's going on because I've only got one screen at a time. So, in other words, by reversing all of the above, in other words, disconnecting almost everything, what we see is everything is actually still broken, which would suggest that things maybe are corrupted under the hood. Yeah. So, just for our enrichment, and if you guys find this dull, you can always go away, but good luck to you when you bump into this problem. It's kind of what I'm thinking. Okay, so once we take all of the plugins away, everything's working. Okay, let's just start there. Okay, that's breaking it. Now, this is completely non-intuitive, but just for fun, I'm going to reverse these. Okay, it doesn't make any difference. That makes sense. I mean, I would expect the... Let me check something. Yeah, it's not set to clipping mask. So, yeah, this is strange. Darren, is there anything you're seeing about the alpha over effect that I am missing here? Well, okay, good point. That is kind of how it appears. Let's stretch this down and see. No, it doesn't matter. When I explicitly hold it, it still isn't showing up, which is very, 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 very strange. So let's just think about this. Okay, so the easiest solution to all of this, by the way, is to just forget it and notice that if the mouth, okay, well, maybe that won't work, but let's find out. I was going to say, if the mouth does not, I've got so many things bundling through my brain right now. I'm thinking about 7 things all at once here in terms of problem solving. Therefore, I can't speak clearly. You are duly informed. Try turning preview mode off for a minute. Well, okay, so what Darren's suggesting is perhaps this is a buffer flush problem, because sometimes what goes into the render buffer will actually remain there even though the underlying data has changed, meaning that it would render properly if you just turned the render preview off and then back on. Not in this case. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the shadow. Now, here, things break. So my assumption is the shadows don't actually affect the mouth, although it might turn out that it's a problem in that there's a little bit of the mouth I have to erase to reveal the shadow. This is completely obnoxious that one would ever have to do this, but there it is. So the way I'm going to try this again this time is to do another over operation with the mouth in front and everything else in back. And as you can see, dear friends, it's still broke. Therefore, here's what I'm going to try. I have a theory, a completely radical theory that I'm going to attempt to test. And that theory is that this has something to do with Tahoma. Just there's something about the subsheet functionality that has a couple obscure bugs that maybe normally would not appear. Okay, so stop everything. I got to think about this for a second. Okay, so every positive solution comes with a new problem that you didn't foresee. The problem is if I explode the subsheet, the plastic tool will no longer be applied to the entire group of cells. Now that can be fixed through the schematic, obviously, before somebody puts it in the comments, because I know that. But my thinking would be probably I wonder if I can just copy the shadow column to the top level. Can I do that? I'm just going to try it. I don't even know. Darren is probably kicking his computer screen right now going, Dave, you can't do that. But let's find out. How do I get a... Darren, do you know, how do I get a single level from the sub X sheet to the top? Is there a simple way to do that? There's only one subscene. There's only one subscene. This is the top level scene. I just put the character in his own subscene, that's all. So if I explode it, then what I'll have to do, okay, I'll show how to do that because some people are probably wondering. Okay, so what you do is let's explode the subsheet. Okay, so let's explode it. That means that all of the levels, let's leave the parenting relationships, I don't care. All the levels are brought up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these and do what Darren showed me earlier and fold these columns just to make them small. Okay, so now what we have is we have a problem because when we look at our schematic, what we're going to find is that we've got column 2. That's our resizer. This is our plastic tool. And this, I assume, is the group. I'm going to open the group just to see. Yeah, and it's got these pegs, some of which, of course, are erroneous. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this and map it to there. So now, at least I think we're going to. Are we going to? Are we serious? Are we seriously? You're going to tell me now that mapping a peg this is where we stay cool. Okay? Let's ungroup these. What we need to do is remove the peg. And then what we want to do is take the... Right now these are in the correct order. Character, mouth, shadow. Okay? So now we're going to take all 3 of these and map them through the plastic tool. That should put us back in our original situation. The question now becomes, will it render? And it won't. Yeah. So I would have to say, I'm sorry to report this, but today, no, I'm not going to make a folder backup now. Okay, so interestingly, if the matter at issue had something to do with implicit hold, then this drawing would disappear on this frame, which it doesn't. It only disappears once this interaction between the mouth, the multiply, actually. Maybe it's the clipping mask thing. Let me think about this. Okay, actually, right now, we are not... Well, wait, I got to go back over here. Okay. Let's ungroup these guys. And what we see is these are all just columns we're not using, like the original pencil test and stuff like that. Okay. So for my purposes, honestly, I really want this to be the way it was before. You know, the mouth should be, I mean, this is really stupid. This is like, this should not be happening. Okay. You put the mouth over the character. That means that this node means that those two columns effectively are acting as one with the box on top. So I should be able to do whatever I want to do with this as if it were just a single column. Well, what do I want to do with it? What I want to do with it is multiply the shadow over top of it. Boom. That's it. This is not a complicated setup. Now, is it still there? No. So we have uncovered a truly catastrophic bug. Whatever the hell is going on is so severe, and this is version 1.2, so whatever it is has been around for a while, and let's leave it at that. It's a very catastrophic bug. And all because I just wanted to add shadows. So I'm going to turn this off. Zip it up and send to Darren or me. Zip it up. I'm going to, Tom, maybe I will and maybe I won't. I'm not going to guarantee I'll do that because it'd be stupid for me to tell you I'm going to do it if I wind up not doing it. So I appreciate your willingness to help, that's for sure. I mean, geez, what okay, so we're talking about going to, okay, anime, salt and light, scenes. I'm on a different screen right now, guys, just so you know. Episode 1, this is, or episode 3, I'm sorry, 327. So we're going to 327. And of course, that's not, I'm sorry, unlike Krita, my bad, everything isn't all in the same folder. So scenes, so we've actually got to go to 0327 TNZ file. And just so you know, the only reason I'm resistant to doing what I'm doing right now is it completely snaps me out of my creative mode. The reality is that what I'm dealing with here, I'll probably solve it, right? I've solved every other problem I've ever had somehow, and I'm sure I'll figure it out. And so this is a complete destroy the whole creative flow going off here and dealing with essentially tech support, which is wonderful that it's available. So I'm just like freaking searching for the tunes file. And I actually have to say, stop, freeze, gonna stop right there. Not gonna do it. I may get to it, but yeah, I'm not gonna break the creative flow. I'd rather have the scene be completely broken and either stop the live stream or go on to something else than to get distracted with pathways that may or may not lead to anything at all. Whatever this problem is, it's been present in the software for at least 3 years. Okay, so if no one's ever noticed it, it could be fixed in newer versions, right? What are we up to, 1.5 or something now? Suggestion for you going forward, if you just work and comment now and again to keep your workflow going, that would be fine for us, audience, I'm sure. I don't even know what you, as opposed to what? As opposed to like hankering in and trying to solve this problem here, live, in real time. I'm not sure what you're contrasting that with. While in preview mode, try right-clicking and choosing Regenerate Preview. Okay, okay. That's a good idea. Regenerate Preview. Okay. Yeah, that still didn't do it. That's a poser, folks. That is a poser. So, as opposed to detailed explaining, oh, yeah, well, fine. Yeah, that's fine. I'm reporting in real time what I'm experiencing because it's literally what I'm doing. So, there it is. This is, I'm going to go ahead and smack that on there so that, I mean, logistically, in terms of the normal flow, this column should be on top. So, I'm going to say, this has got to be one of the weird ones because I've done shadows on lots of shots. We're not dealing with a sub X sheet anymore, you know. So, well, there's one thing we can try also, by the way, that works surprisingly often with Tahoma 2D, which is just shut it off and restart it. It is freakishly freakish how often that works. So let's find out. Why not? Give it a try. Okay. There's the blah, blah, blah. And it still doesn't work. So, yeah, I mean, this is where it would really be cool to have. I would love if programs like this had a secret window that is a super verbose log where everything that you do, the software tells you what it thinks is going on and what it's doing about it in response. That would be so cool to be able to see that. When I write code, that's what I do. I tend to stupidly verbosely log stuff. I don't deliver it that way. I mean, once you've got things working, you take that out for performance reasons, because streaming every little detail to the console is an expensive operation. But that's the problem, is you don't know what the software thinks is going on here. I had that same thought exactly. A pop-up that can be moved in Inspector. Yeah, it would be so good, you know, especially if, you know, when you think about open source software, philosophically the idea is that everyone's welcome here in terms of developers, right? So anything you can do to make it easier for people to dive in, this is a risky conversation to have, because if we get into the software domain, we are getting into territory that is actually partly why I quit live streaming, is because I have strong opinions about this, and basically why am I going to sit here and rant all day because there's like 2 people listening and nobody really gives a shit, right? So that's risky behavior for me because it turns live streaming into a negative experience. Of course, that's my choice. So I'll sum it up this way. In truth, most open source development is a very rigidly gated community, and the way it remains gated is that problems of documentation, dependency hell, and pre-configured build environments are pretty much lacking. Okay? Like, in other words, I should be able to download a Docker or a I forget what the Linux app image, something like that, that is absolutely 100% bulletproof. I can open it up, hit the compile button, and either Krita or Tahoma 2, whatever program I want to build, builds perfectly. That should be available. If the open source community actually wanted people to be able to participate, because the stopper for me in participating has always been you always, with no exceptions, discover you put your toe into the shallow end of the pool, you're 6 inches into the water, and you find out that the process of facilitating participation is so utterly broken that it is just, there's nothing fun about it at all. So, you want to see the FX schematic? Sure. Absolutely, bro. Okay, so that's the stage schematic. And at this point, it's been in a couple different configurations, but my effect schematic is simply that. We're multiplying the shadow over the character, and then the mouth layer is just on top of both of them. Virtuous cycle is a term. Most participants give more than they take. Things are healthy. Yeah, you know, and I know in the case of Hala, by having some conversations with Hala, I wonder what pronoun Hala's using these days. But Hala's a man who's transitioned to a woman, for so I'm not sure what to call Hala. Anyway, but Hala's been at the heart of creative development since like 2007 or something, like 20 years. Hala knows the code base, and I know that that person is really working hard to keep up with all the bugs and feature requests and stuff like that. So it's hard. It's hard. My only contention about software development is if very early in the process we were extremely meticulous about making sure dependency hell can't happen, documenting copiously, and then providing pre-configured build environments. If those three things existed, you could dive into any development process and come up to speed on the code base. Like the biggest problem is knowing where things are. Try using mat in. Okay, I can do that. Mat in. I've used mat in before, and it definitely can be. Is that a? Oh, mat. I'm sorry, dude. Mat in. Okay. That does not seem like that should work, but it does. It works. I wonder why mat in is working. So the source is the shadow. Okay, I've got to expand these columns. I guess that did the trick, right? Mouse clicking. Okay, so I need to turn that off. But what I'm looking at now is, see, the shadow is still bleeding over, though. So we didn't actually... So we solved the artifact problem, but the shadow's not matted, so that doesn't really do us any good. Any idea on that? Mat in. It seems like mat in. Okay, so the mat is the character. Okay, now this is interesting. I'm sorry, dude. Okay. I was not in preview mode. Forgive me. Okay. Oh, yes. But then we still want this. There we go. There we go. There we go. Okay. So, thank you, Darren. Okay, so to show people what we just did is we replaced the multiply, which in most cases I've been using for years and it usually works. But today's bug day, so that's okay. So what we're doing instead is we're using mat in, which means the character of Salud becomes our mask. And that means that anything that goes into this, what they're calling source, I would not call this source if it was me. I would change the code so that this is I would call it overlay or something. But that's just me. So the shadow is essentially clamped to the outline of the character. Well, the problem is that now the character is only serving as a mask. So by having this actually go in both directions, we restore the character to the scene. So now the shadow is appropriately masked, and we've solved it. So, multiply failed for you? Wow, and you're not using the same version. That's weird. Okay, for those who don't know, the reason that's weird is because Darren's been... he can't possibly be on version 1.2, and I've been using multiply for shadows for years, like at least 4 years. So that's pretty strange, but there it is, folks. Things seem to be working now, though. All right, so let's go ahead and generate a preview. And for those who might lament the fact that a lot of our time today has gone to solving an obscure problem. Yeah, see, you're on 1.3.1. I'm on 1.2. I never upgrade unless there's something really broken. Okay, that is punitively broken. That's why with Krita, I'm either using 5.1.3 or 5.0.2. I don't use the latest versions because they introduced problems that didn't exist in earlier versions. What was I going to do here? Oh yeah, the schematic. Okay, to Darren's point, what probably should happen here, let's save our work just in case we want to satisfy us with what we have and restore it. Okay, why are we even considering that? Well, if you look closely here, you see this little artifacting here on the shadow. That's because the mouth is actually covering up the shadow because it's on top. Now, if we put the mouth here, that fixed it. So I guess I don't need to fix it in the schematic. So what just happened here? This is a little confusing. The character and the shadow are here and here, and the mouth is between them. Using the mad-in effect, that doesn't seem to matter. That, in other words, the normal signal flow of what's layered over what seems to be working. Okay. So, in other words, we didn't need to use an over filter to combine these two columns in the schematic in order for the proper layer ordering to occur. Does that make sense? Okay. So we're done. I think we're done. Okay, the plastic tool does seem to be working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save my work, and then I'm going to hit Control-Shift-R, and then I'm going to jump back to the show. And actually, there's kind of a few things I wanted to show on the show edit as well here today. So let's transition over to this screen. You don't get to see my handsome mug anymore.
You know it was a debacle.
Okay, yeah. So what I did was I had this shot of Salud here. This is the one we just worked on. And I wound up chopping in bits of Golik. So we've got this shot of Golik.
I'm sure.
Here he's just going. He's annoyed. Okay.
I'm sure it was just marvelous. Enough with your incessant prattle.
Okay. So he says incessant prattle, and I wanted to get just a blink
prattle
attitude from Salud.
You know it was a debacle.
I put Golik's next line over Salud because that allows the storytelling to flow better. When you let audio and clips overlap, you get a lot better continuity in your edit.
Prattle.
So blink.
You know it was a debacle.
But then what I did was I took this shot and ran the end of it in reverse. So this is actually drilling into the beginning of this cut. In other words, this is actually this, basically running backwards. And that allowed me to sew together these two.
It was a debacle.
See?
Well, somebody's got their tights in a tizzy. Besides Lady Carliana. But oh, sure, I get it. Unload on the head.
Okay, so now this, we're going to have to bring in another shot of Salud here for sure. But it's interesting to me that from a storytelling standpoint, this is all, literally I took this shot that has Golik doing this little shift in his body weight, and I thought it would be interesting. What's key here in the scene is that Salud mentions a reaction that Lady Carliana did. Hey, Chiz. And that means something to Golik. Okay, we don't know what yet, but we know that that's significant to him. How do we convey that without having to draw and render a whole nother scene? And what I did was I said, well, if I just take this static frame from this earlier shot, which I just simply went into this the folder of the render and just grab the individual frame, put that in there, run the body weight shift in reverse so he perks up, and then do a freeze frame with another still frame. So this whole shot required no animation. I simply reuse bits and pieces of an earlier shot. And then this is what you get.
Well, somebody's got their tights in a tizzy. Besides Lady Carliana. But oh, sure, I get it. Unload on the help.
Okay, so I think salute, unload on the help is a great line. So I think we definitely need to put him in there. Okay, so let's see if there's a way to do that. Let's shorten this. And
Besides Lady Carliana. But oh, sure, I get it. Unload on the help.
Okay, so now the question for me becomes this. Is there a way to reuse something from earlier so that we can tell the story really well without having to do a bunch more animation? Because frankly, when you're dealing with when you're dealing with a lot of dialogue and just characters interacting with each other, it's often the case that you can essentially create 1 or 2 shots and wind up getting 6 or 7 or 8 shots out of them. So what I'm looking at is, first of all, I'm looking for a bad attitude expression on Salute's face, and I think it's going to be here. But nah, he doesn't look ornery enough. So I guess we'll look at the shot we just did. The answer may not exist. Yep, there it is. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this in the trimmer. That's what I want. I want to run this in reverse. And I want to stop it there. Because previous to that his hands go up, okay, and I don't want that in there. So what I want is this right here. Now I'm going to hit tab. Wait, I don't need to hit tab. Normally in Vegas, the audio and video are sewn together. They're linked under the hood. In this case, it's just an image sequence, so there is no audio. So that means this is what I want, and I want to reverse it. Okay, so the point to all this is seeing how you can use the assets you've created to really stretch more storytelling out of them. It's pretty much one of the only things that makes long-form animated cartoon creation by a single person economically feasible. You have to know how to reuse and edit kind of a lot. Let's see what we got here.
Besides Lady Carliana. But oh, sure, I get it. Unload on the help.
Okay, yeah, so this is not timed yet correctly. And this properties, we need to have no resampling going on. Otherwise you get that stupid looking frame doubling.
Unload on the help.
Okay, that was close. I'm going to take that mouth shape out. So now what we're going to do is we're looking at 26A. So let's go, I'm sorry, 27. Okay, so what we had was we had that mouth shape that we said we didn't want. Unfortunately, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, we don't have a version of this with the mouth closed. Okay, so there's more than one way to skin this cat, but I gotta tell you, in many cases what I would do is I would bring this into Krita and just paint the mouth out and create a new picture. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go Control C, Control V. So I pasted a copy of this down here. All right, and this is the one I'm going to drag in to Vegas. And the reason I'm doing it that way is so that I can then change the image and have it work. Okay,
Edit. Unload on the help.
Okay, see, so we're gonna stop him there. But now we're going to modify this image. Thusly, let's go over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open that copy that I just made in here. and we're going to open as a new document. And we're just going to do a quick and dirty fix. So let's grab this brush, zoom in, sample that color, and paint out the mouth. And then if we want, we can do whatever we want with this, obviously. So if we want to take this and even crank this down a little bit more to show Salud's frustration, we can do that. We can do whatever we want with that one frame. Okay, and just save it. Boom. And now when we go back to Vegas, unless there's some bizarre color conversion thing that happened, you can see that the final image changed. And let's see if it flows.
Sure, I get it. Unload on the help.
Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this line of dialogue and just move it downstream slightly.
But oh, sure, I get it. Unload on the help.
I think I still want it even down further.
Unload on the help.
Okay, that's slightly too far. Okay, and then I think...
But oh, sure.
And I'll just put that kind of in the middle. So that gives us a nice flow. Have you thought about using AI tools in between? Oh my God. No. Absolutely not.
Buckle.
I would try it.
Well,
you know,
somebody's got their tights in a
if the right tool showed up. And no. There's so far, I gotta tell you, no. The excitement about AI is well founded. There's a lot of really cool things you can do, and I think from the standpoint of, say, character design, background painting, there's a lot of applications that are really useful if you're going to be using like Mid-Journey or something like that. For tweening, a better tween than let's put it this way. If I create a shape in Blender or Tahoma 2D, and let's say I use the plastic tool and set up a bunch of nodes in order to tween between two shapes, okay? So I do that, and it does a linear tween, and then maybe I've got the ability to modify some of the pathways so that the tween is not perfectly linear. The reality is that the number of situations in real-world cartoon animation where that type of tweening is actually useful or necessary is shockingly rare. And I only mention it that way because it's the kind of thing that people that are kind of new to the party of animation or new to the software, it's the type of thing that actually turns them on. It was for me too. So in other words, when you're early in the game, just the fact that you can move things from here to there and they morph and change and you sort of can control that and sort of bring things to life is what turns you on about animation. It's fine. That's cool. It's great. Problem is that when you get into actually creating real world work, what you find out is those capabilities are actually pretty useless. They're not completely useless. In this case, they're a little bit useful in the way that we used the plastic tool to just bend his body like that. That's the plastic tool that's making him go back and forth. But that took, what, 1 minute to set up? Literally, 1 minute. Boom, boom, done. It's that simple. Okay? So in other words, I'm operating at 8 frames per second, and 8 frames per second is the frame rate that is both economical and has an aesthetic that I like. In other words, if I had AI tools that would put tweens in between every one of these mouth shapes, for example, instead of just holding them for 2 frames, it would look worse, not better. Everything would be too smooth, too squishy, too linear. So in other words, the AI application is really, really compelling in terms of what it can do, but not compelling at all in terms of when you would actually use it. I think you would discover It is enormously rare. The only reason I take a moment here to make that point is that, and I'll be really honest with you guys here. This is a transparent moment for me. I want to really say this. One of the things that is dear to my heart when I live stream or am talking to this audience is the mindset that someone brings to the party of animation before they've actually had tons of experience. Now, Noel may be a very experienced animator. I don't know. Because for me, Noel is new to this chat. Okay. So I may be insulting you right now, Noel Lavelle. And if I am, I apologize for that. But in my thinking, what's important to me is I'm trying to say, okay, if you're either a neophyte animator or a young person, if I can spare you going down the pathways that are extremely compelling and yet lead you nowhere, then I want to spare you that. Okay? The quintessential example of that is the example I just gave. If I hop into Blender and just use the animation tools, I can draw a ball on the screen and move it from here to there. Initially, that's extremely exciting because it's so easy. The problem is everything that's easy is also worthless. Now, that's not completely true. So if you could have, to kind of put a button on this conversation, Nolaval, if you could have fully AI informed tweening in an animation, what you would get most of the time would be what we're currently getting when we see really low budget explainer videos. You would see very squared off, simplistic characters that move in very unnatural, linear sorts of ways. That's what you would see. Now, that is not useless. If you want, in other words, if you want to do animation, and what your goal is to make money, go do explainer videos because they're super cheap and fast to produce, but yet in the business to business climate, people pay good money for it. You know. But I think that's where this leads. My general feeling on AI is this: anything that becomes, the minute something becomes easy, it is already, by definition, already passé. It's already old news. It's already more or less irrelevant. And what you get with, in other words, with AI, this is why when you go on Facebook, you're going to see all kinds of ads for AI tools for, $69 or maybe $199 or whatever. You only pay once. It's normally $6.99, but today, if you order now, it's just $29. Well, why is that? It's because we're in a window of time where the tools have become easy enough to employ for reasonably technically proficient people that there's a brief window of time where they can sell a product that within a year will be utterly useless. Those ads will disappear because what they're selling will have become so easy, just push a button, that everybody's doing it. And once everybody's doing it, it's not valuable anymore, other than in very niche applications. So, what's the niche application? Well, in animation, it would be the character designer or background painter who's maybe using Mid-Journey, for example, or Dolly or something, to get a rough background painting done really fast. Now, that's useful. And then you paint over it and make it unique, and now all of a sudden you can still copyright it and all the rest, right? So there's definitely some applications, but the truth is, the dirty little secret about animation that nobody talks about is that 99% of the quality animation that's happened in the last 30 years has happened in a very, very small community of pretty well-connected people in Hollywood. Some stuff comes out of the independent sector or whatever, but actually not much. Now, of course, Japanese anime is a bit of an exception to that, but in the general case, most people who start animating never really do much with it other than amuse themselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a perfectly fine thing to do if you want to do it. Does this make sense? If there's a crux to all this, the crux is that everybody's really titillated about AI tools. My opinion is, again, to put a button on it, and it's kind of be my final word on the subject at the moment, is that I have a choice today to give away, let's say, 15 minutes of my mental and physical energy. Am I going to give that energy to investigating a new tool or idea or compelling proposition that might save me some work? Or am I going to give that 15 minutes of energy to just fucking doing the work? What I have found since having been involved with animation in various ways since 1998, really probably 95, in all that time, what I've found is that 99% of the energy spent on trying to avoid just doing it the hard way is completely wasted. It turns out that tool, it turns out once or twice a year that tool is useful. And the rest of the time, no, actually you just need to be able to draw. Actually, you just need to have a sense of timing. Actually, you just kind of need to be able to act and convey emotion. Things like that, right? So the way I'm trying to help is to say, learn from my experience that everybody that's usually everything, people come and they talk about the new version of Blender that's out. And on it goes. And it turns out that this is useful, but not very, because for you as an individual, it would have been way better for as many years as you can count having been involved with it. It's going to turn out that your time would have been better spent just learning to draw and feel how motion feels, not trying to learn about the latest tool. That's the gist. I mean, that's just, and I've learned it the hard way, and I've learned it over and over and over again in 100 different ways. So, anyway, let's see what we got with Salud. Are we on the right screen? Yeah, we are. I've gotten myself in trouble a few times by being on the wrong screen. But yeah, this feels pretty good. Let's go back here. Let's look at the edit, and then we'll call it a day. Valerie just got up. I want to go hang out with her. So let's see what we have.
It was a debacle.
Actually, let's go back just a little further.
I'm sure it was just marvelous. Enough with your incessant prattle. It was a debacle. Well, somebody's got their tights in a tizzy.
I like it.
Besides Lady Carliana. But oh, sure, I get it. Unload on the help.
Yeah, I mean, it worked.
I may have
been a tad harsh.
So for me, it kind of dovetails back to the previous conversation. It's a good note to end on. What I have found in creating 2 complete 24-minute cartoon episodes all by myself, what I've learned is it's stuff like this. It isn't the latest version of Blender or AI tools that wind up saving you time or making your storytelling better. It's stupid stuff like this, like saying, oh, well, if I just stuck this one static frame in and then run this little piece in reverse, and I'm not thinking about the tools, I'm thinking about the storytelling. I'm thinking about the audience's experience with the show. And this is the kind of just stupid, cheap, simple stuff is actually where you wind up saving time. And it's old school. What I did here, we could have done with the software that was available 25, 30 years ago. Nothing's improved that much. Little bit. I mean, hell, the version of Vegas I'm using that you see on your screen right now is about 12 years old. No joke. So anyway, listen, guys, it's been fun. It's been super cool. I think I'm going to keep on rocking doing this. And Tom, I'm going to think about your comment because, again, one of the things I try to avoid when I live stream, but do tend to slip into, is these sort of rants. Some of it comes from a good place, some of it doesn't. So I want to kind of think about that. But anyway, I appreciate your comment, and I will ponder that. And Novel, I hope I helped you. Anyway, guys, I'm going to split on out of here. And as you guys know, there will be more later.